that you should not be approaching people under 16 for sex anyway, particularly if you're a much older person.
Well, if a young person is being pestered for sex by an older person and they don't want that, then that quite clearly is wrong. And they need to be given the confidence that they have a right to say no to sex. Now, the problem is, if you say that no one under the age of consent has the ability to give their valid consent in law, which is what the legal system currently says, you're effectively saying that young people have no sexual rights.
The law is there to help them say no.
The law can't have it both ways. It can't say that people have a right to say no to sex and then they don't have any rights in law when it comes to sex. So what I'd like to see is a revision of the whole legal system so that we back up a lower age of consent, not in order to encourage young people to have sex, but to remove from them the threat of criminalization and to back it up with earlier, more explicit sex education in schools so young people have the knowledge, the information, the skills, the confidence to make their own responsible choices.
Peter, thank you. Joining this part of the debate is columnist Anna Blundy, who thinks it's unnecessary for the law to set an age of consent. Anna Blundy, you're 27 now. Did you respect the law when you were younger?
No, not remotely, and I didn't know anybody else who did either. I was desperately trying to lose my virginity. Not that I think there's anything to lose. I think you can only gain, really. But I was desperately trying to lose my virginity from the age of about 12. Finally managed to cajole some poor man into it when I was 15. And I think a lot of other people were behaving in the same way. We used to have a competition at school to see who would lose it first and how many people we could sleep with. And none of us really slept with very many people at all. And it was all fairly innocent. But it's good fun. I think it's preposterous to suggest that there needs to be a law to enforce this.
Were you unaware there was a law?
No, probably not. I think it was a joke. But you can't possibly enforce this kind of thing. We're genetically programmed to start wanting to reproduce in our early teens. And you want to. You can't help it. I mean, it's all that anybody between the age of about 12 and 16 ever think about, male and female.
Melanie, how are you going to police a generation that thinks like this?
Well, you can't police it, but I think that's no argument for saying that there shouldn't be laws. I mean, laws express the collective sort of moral sense of a community. They lay down broad boundaries about where behaviour is considered right or wrong. Laws are broken all the time. We have laws, for example, to police speeding limits. The vast majority of people ignore speeding limits. And it doesn't
You're
mean
not
to say that
evolutionarily programmed to speed in your car. I mean, the point is, it's inside us, it's hormonal. You want to have sex in your early teens.
Well,
you don't want to
evolutionary programmed to rape and pillage, probably, and to have to have territorial conquest. But I think in the name of civilization, we should actually try to curb these things, don't you?
Germaine? I think there's a strangeness about this word consent. It implies that someone else has initiated a course of action, and you have to be a certain age in order to consent to it. Because the law is actually interested not in the criminality of the person consenting, but in the criminality of the person initiating the act. Now, it seems to me that what's going on here is a recognition of a disproportion or an asymmetry in sexual relations, which is actually, in a strange way, institutionalizing sex as a dominant relationship. I seek to dominate you, you are old enough to consent, or something like that. Yes. Now, I think this is the grammar that has to be altered, but it isn't going to be changed until our whole attitude towards sexuality as the expression of a personality is completely transformed.
But don't you feel that young people are being pressurized into having sex who don't want to? I had a girl come into my office, about the same age as you say that you were out there desperately trying to lose your virginity, came in, opened the door, said, "Mrs. Elliott, I have a secret. I don't want to lose my virginity. I'm not ready, but I can't tell anybody." So she was going around bragging to everybody, indeed, that she had done sex. The pressure on young people needs to be balanced with our protection of them from things they're not ready to do.
You can't do that with the law, for goodness sake.
Yeah, but in the Netherlands, the age of consent is effectively 12 for both heterosexual and homosexual relations. That's a legal right which exists, but it's backed up with good quality sex education and a culture which says that young people have sexual rights, including the right to say yes to sex and the right to say no. And the end result is that in the Netherlands, young people choose to have their first sexual experience, on average, at a later age than in Britain, where the age of consent is 16. And the number of pregnancies and abortions in young teenage girls in the Netherlands is between 7 and 11 times less than in Britain.
And I'll tell
so
you
that shows that sexual rights for young people, backed up with good quality sex education, leads to wiser, more responsible behavior.
What that shows is good quality sex education allows children to realize the consequences of actions and to take responsibility. It doesn't necessarily follow that because you say, oh, you can do it at 12, that therefore people are not getting pregnant. It just shows. I agree with you only on the sex education. I do not agree with you on lowering the age of consent to either 14 or 12.
But this is a culture of rights.
Can I wait a minute? Let's just take
losing their virginities at a very similar age worldwide. It doesn't make any difference what the age of consent is. People want to have sex at a certain age.
You see, to follow your logic, I don't understand why you want an age of consent at all. Because to follow your logic, if you can't police sex and if the age, if you can't sort of say at what age a child becomes properly consensual, then it follows you must have no laws regulating sex behavior. You must have no laws outlawing incest.
So how would you protect
You
children
must have no laws protecting children whatsoever.
Would you allow 13-year-olds to sleep with 15-year-olds? Would you be happy with that?
I don't see why not, honestly. I mean, I don't think there's much you can do about it. Obviously, if my son or daughter said, I really fancy so-and-so, I'm off to have sex now, I'd probably be in a terrible panic and lock all the doors and refuse to ever let them out again. So there's a great deal of hypocrisy going on from my point of view. On the other hand, I know that when he or she is at school, they're going to be sexually messing around for a fairly
But
early
are you
age.
saying that it's the 10-year-old and the 9-year-old, say in a case where there are 10-year-old boys having,
My son,
10-year-old boys having sex with 9-year-old, that they can give informed consent to that they can know what the responsibilities are of a sexual relationship? What you're proposing is that children as young as 5, 6, 7, 8 can involve themselves in sexual relationships with anyone of any age.
But you know, one of the problems...
Excuse me?
But one of the problems here is that we have no concept of, as it were, baby sex. There are other cultures have had concepts where kids have known that they can have lots of sexual games, but they don't have babies, and they do X, Y, and Z, but there's one kind of sex they don't have because that's for grown-ups. Now, we have only one idea of what you do. It's this monolithic notion that relationships exist when a certain kind of penetrative contact has been established. And I think this is one of our real problems. We won't allow it to be polymorphous.
Melanie, you were saying earlier about the sexualization of young people, not by their hormones or their natural exuberance and affection and curiosity about each other's genitals, but by the advertising world of Spice Girls and Barbie dolls, in which people are commercially sexualized. Now, how can you fight it? How can you deal with it?
Well, you can't fight it very easily, but I think what we're talking about is a sort of cultural deformation, if you like, in which children are regarded as adults, adults are regarded as children on the one hand. And on the other hand, sex, as we can see from this conversation, has been reduced to nothing more important or more significant than a kind of sport. Merely genital gratification. That is precisely the implication that's come out of what has been said in this discussion. That is of so little significance that what difference does it make if a 9-year-old child has sex with anyone of any age? And this is part of the culture. The culture has divorced, to coin a phrase, sex from the original trinity of marriage and children. It's removed sex from any idea of having any intrinsic significance concerned with human dignity. It's reduced it to a genital gratification. It's reduced it to simply physical pleasure. If it's reduced to simply physical pleasure, if it really is of no more significance than physical pleasure, then clearly the logic of this discussion is obvious from the beginning.
Anna, no more than physical pleasure?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I'm sorry to have given that impression. It certainly isn't what I believe. I think it can be simply physical pleasure, and I think it often is, and it can be very significant. What I'm trying to say is it doesn't have to be hugely significant. People make a great big deal about losing your virginity and who you're having sex with, when a lot of people have an awful lot, in fact pretty much everyone has an awful lot of insignificant sex, either with their husband or wife or with other people. And then there are moments when you have fantastically significant sex. It depends on the occasion. It just doesn't have to be a massive, great big deal. Of course it can be, and if you're having sex within a relationship with someone that you love, it's a lot nicer, and much more important.
But wait a minute, you said something under your breath. You're talking children.
We are talking about 14-year-old children. You're talking about grown-ups having sex with each other. We're talking about children, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds. they cannot enter into a significant relationship.
We started off with 14-year-olds, and I think that there are 14-year-olds who probably can enter into a sexual relationship. Some people mature very early, and I think that that's something to do with their psychological state. It's nothing to do with whether or not they had sex early. I think people who have sex early often have all sorts of underlying issues pushing them.
Or their mental and emotional
both,
maturity.
actually. Both. No, mental and emotional.
You've
I
met
meant.
11,
I
12,
meant.
13-year-olds who
But
have
Melanie,
the emotional and mental maturity of adults, have you?
Not of adults necessarily, they're completely different, but I wouldn't mind if they're
Well,
having
but
sex
that's what
with
you're
each
talking
other.
about.
Melanie, I think
No,
you're
it
quite
isn't.
wrong to say that we're not concerned with the emotional welfare of young people. The whole emphasis in the outrage campaign about 14 is to back this up with good quality sex education, which does focus on the emotional side, which teaches young kids about the importance of having happy, healthy, safe relationships, about sustaining those relationships, about having good quality relationships, about respecting each other. And the only way you can really do that is if you create a culture where young people know and feel that they have rights over their bodies, rights over their emotions, so they stick up for themselves against anybody who wants to abuse them.
But it's inappropriate because of the age. It's a bit like saying, we're going to teach children how to, run the household finances, drive a car, do all the other adult things at 12, 13. There's a point at which, because they're children, they're simply not able to digest this information. They need more experience of life. They're still apprentices at 12, 13.
Here we have a conversation of conflict between young people who are very inclined to be almost anarchic, but with reservations about their behaviour, and people who feel they need protection and care and have, for the highest motives, a wish to look after them. How does one set of people in society, those with people's welfare, younger people's welfare at heart, control, and to what extent can they control young people who are now motivated by all sorts of exciting things from the very earliest age? How can it happen?
I find it quite fascinating just how volatile sexual culture is, especially in the pre-teens and the teens. They develop their own notions about what's appropriate to their gender. One of my godchildren announced one day at the age of 5 that she wouldn't have a sweet because sweets were for greedy boys. And I don't know where she got that idea from.
Obviously,
Now,
use them much.
if we talk about, I have students who have been made to feel in their public school years when they were coming up to A-level, they've been told that they were frigid because they hadn't joined in the sex games on the back seat of the bus and so on. And they have clung to that distinction. We are the frigid ones, and they are the slags or whatever. They will all develop their own tribal culture.
So are adults mistaken in thinking that anything that the law does, welfare groups, columnists, are we wrong to think their influence can be...
Sex is basically transgressive.
And
Sexual excitement comes from transgression. And we're all madly trying to organise it that there'll be nothing to transgress against, whether we're Peter or whether we're Melanie.
But what we're trying to do is to protect children until they're ready to do that. And I think it's wrong for us to say,
anyone ready though. Lots of people are ready at 107.
They may not.
I don't feel ready for a relationship, and I'm married. For goodness sake.
Well, we can talk about that afterwards. But if you were happy for your 12-year-old to go out and have a sexual relationship with a much older adult, then I would have to have a real problem.
We're really talking about
the age of consent being lowered to 12. That's what would happen.
There's a difference between my being happy for them to do that, I don't expect I would be, and then doing it anyway.
Yeah, but what we're saying is we as adults are saying, you've got all these rights. We are frightened as adults to say no because we know this isn't good for you. We are our experience and our maturity. We're here as your parents to protect you, including age 14. We're gonna abdicate that responsibility because you've got a right to go out and have sex.
Protect them against something else. Protect them against violence. Protect them against all kinds of abuse. Don't protect them against sexual acts.
You are demonstrating something quite clearly here, which is that this is a rite of passage at the crux in which a child or emerging adult defies its parents. This is the territory where the defiance takes place. Yeah. And that is not going to yield to the law, is it, Melanie?
No, and there's no way that you can ever police this without being, coercive and authoritarian. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a law which sets the basic framework and boundaries for a decent society and a civilized society, and which has an impact not necessarily on someone like Anna. Clearly, in every classroom in the land, there are young girls and boys who are, getting up to all sorts of stuff behind the bike shed, as it were. But it creates a kind of general ambiance. And if we were to lose that law and that general sort of boundary-making ability of the law in this case, we would have a situation where it was literally a sort of free-for-all, in which there was no such thing as abuse of children, there was no such thing as exploitation of children, there was no need for protection of children.
Let's give the last word to the youngest.
I don't think that's what would happen at all. I think Germaine's right in that what we're trying to do is stop there being anything to transgress. And often if you take rules away, people stop breaking them. We were all desperately trying to lose our virginities before we were 16. And I think that if there had been no law, we might well have just looked at ourselves and thought, do I fancy him or not, rather than, right, I've only got 25 minutes here.